Hello, everybody. Thank you for those who joined early. If you're not shy, please tell me in the chat where you're dialing in from today. But in the meantime, let's get started. So, good morning or good evening, wherever you're tuning in from today. Thank you so much for joining our webinar on Transform Vulnerability Management with Critical Start and Qualys. I am your webinar host, Crystal, and I am super excited to kick us off. We have a fantastic session lined up, but before I hand it over to our speakers, there are a few housekeeping notes to cover. So first, the session is recorded and you will receive the recording within 24 hours post-event via email. If you don't see that email, please feel free to reach out at events@criticalstart.com and I'd be happy to assist you. Next, we will be launching polls throughout the session, so please be sure to engage with us. We love to see your results. And for questions, please use the Q&A function, or you may even use the chat to submit, and we will make sure we save time for Q&A near the end of the session. And it doesn't end there because today we are also giving away a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee. And to enter the giveaway, all you have to do is answer the poll questions or ask a question in the chat. So it's very simple and the winner will be contacted post-event. So best of luck to all and let's dive right in. I am very excited to introduce our speakers today. We are joined by Chris Carlson from Critical Start and John Delroderi from Qualys. John, I'll hand it over to you now. Please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Hi, I am John Delattery, and let me go ahead and start sharing my screen here. My name is John Delattery. I am a Senior Partner Solution Architect at Qualys, and today is my pleasure to join Critical Start and to talk to you about our Enterprise TRU Risk platform to help you measure, communicate, and eliminate cyber risk from your business. Let me navigate forward here. Okay. For many of you, you know Qualys only as a vulnerability management tool, but we are the industry leading vulnerability management tool today, but we're also a lot more. So today I'm going to talk to you about Qualys and how our solutions can help you reduce your cyber risk. Qualys is over a 25-year legacy in the vulnerability management space. Today we have tens of thousands of customers throughout the world. We have deployed nearly 100 million cloud agents and perform over 6 billion IP scans each year. Qualys has been successful for over a quarter century because we can help you address your number one challenge. You see, customer environments are growing more and more complex each day. Laptops and servers with different operating systems, firewalls and databases, cloud environments, SaaS applications, and IoT to name but a few. In fact, as more and more devices are added, management of these devices becomes a challenge itself. And this leads organizations to ask their most important question: what is going on in this space? But really, we need to get away from the what and ask why. Why is this important? And really, it's because organizations want to reduce their cyber risk. Reducing cyber risk is hard. In fact, when we look at the most common exploited vulnerabilities, we see that attackers are continuing to target old, unpatched vulnerabilities. For example, on this slide, you can see the top 10 exploited vulnerabilities by threat actors. And we see near the top here, CVE from 2017, the Microsoft Office Word remote pad code execution vulnerability with Windows API vulnerability. And there's an even older vulnerability on this top 10 list, and it's from 2012, where it would allow remote attackers to execute arbitrary code via crafted website, Office document, or RTF file. Additionally, the pace of attacks, it's not slowing down, and weaponization is only increasing in speed. The average time to remediate a vulnerability is 30.6 days, but the average time to weaponize an attack is only 19 and a half days. That gives threat actors an 11-day advantage to attack your unpatched vulnerabilities. 11 days where you're leaving the front door to your house wide open. This is why it's critical to understand risk and focus on what matters most. And Crystal, this brings me to my first poll question today. If you can share that with our audience. And that is, how do you measure risk? And you've got a couple options here. Vendor scoring, from Qualys or whoever you're using for vulnerability management. the CVSS scoring system, MITRE ATT&CK framework, perhaps, exploit prediction scoring system, or a proprietary system of calculations. So I'm going to give a few minutes or give a few seconds for that to get populated. Please take a chance to answer this poll so that you can get entered into that drawing for that Amazon gift card. All right, we'll wait about 5 more seconds, and then Crystal, if we could see the results. All right. So we can see here that the most common way we see people measuring risk is with CVSS from the audience here today. And that makes sense because what we have found is that measuring risk is a challenge. And in our experience, almost all risk-based scoring and prioritization of vulnerabilities is through CVSS scoring. So if that's how you're measuring risk, you're in good company. That's how the majority of people do it. But when it comes to CVSS-based scoring, their limitations include, but are not limited to the fact that security teams end up focusing on inconsequential vulnerabilities that don't necessarily reduce overall risk. IT teams miss their SLAs for those high-risk vulnerabilities just because they're overwhelmed with too many things to address. There's too much wasted time communicating and going back and forth to fix these issues that do not reduce risk in any meaningful way. And failures at remediation expose organizations to that unnecessary risk. The challenge, again, is that there's too many critical vulnerabilities. If everything is a high risk, then nothing really is. We looked at the NVD, and here's the big problem with CVSSs. Too many were serious vulnerabilities. More than half of all CVEs scored by CVSS are critical or high severity, which means every other vulnerability scored by CVSS needs to be prioritized. But as you all know, if everything is important, then nothing truly is. So if every other vulnerability is a high risk, how do you communicate what really is a high risk? In fact, what we discovered was that of all the known CVEs going back to 1999, that only 2.5% of them actually contribute to the most risk. These are the vulnerabilities that have weaponized exploit code, or your CISA KEVs, or those exploited by malware, ransomware, or your threat actors, and of course, those named vulnerabilities we see on the news and read about online. So if everything is critical, nothing is. This is why Qualys has taken a different approach to cyber risk measurement and quantification with Qualys TRU Risk. When compared to CVSS and over 2.6 billion vulnerability detections analyzed by Qualys, the results speak for themselves. So out of those 2.6 billion, we found that 2.1 billion were rated as a high or critical according to CVSS. That was 81%. 692 million of those were prioritized by CVSS, but were actually a low risk when we looked into them. Only 603 million had evidence of exploitation or risk of exploitation, and 87 million detections rated as a low risk by a CVSS were actually a high risk according to our TRU Risk calculations. And that is the Qualys TRU Risk advantage. So how do we determine TRU Risk? Well, it starts with detections for over 100,000 CVEs and adding context to them from over 25 threat resources. So now we ingest both CVSS and EPS scores. And every day we're also ingesting real-time threat intelligence from those 25 plus third-party threat sources such as MITRE, CISA-KEV, Reversing Labs, and Gray Noise, and many more. We combine this with our own threat research, and then we normalize, correlate, deduplicate, and contextualize all of this for each vulnerability and each asset to generate a custom score that we call TRU Risk. And this entire calculation is shown to you. It's not hidden away in algorithms or proprietary. We share this calculation with you so you understand how we came up with this score and this prioritization. And this allows you to focus on reducing risk by focusing on what matters most. Using Qualys TRU Risk, we can reduce the number of prioritized vulnerabilities from 52% to just 7% on average. That's a reduction of up to 85% fewer vulnerabilities to prioritize for patching or remediation, while still focusing on the risks that actually contribute the most risk to your organization. And that is the Qualys TRU Risk difference. So now that you understand Qualys TRU Risk, let's take a quick look at our platform and portfolio of solutions. We all know that every organization's attack surface is expanding. At Qualys, we have a lot of ways of gathering information from all these devices. In fact, we have the industry's widest range of ways to collect, monitor, to detect, and defend against threats. And here you can see a list of all of our sensors and scanners. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these today, but I do want you to focus on one thing in particular. It's right there at the top, the Qualys Cloud Agent, which brings us to our platform. Qualys was built in the cloud from the ground up, and we offer solutions for everything from vulnerability management to patching to CNAPP for cloud resources. On this slide, you'll see our different product solutions. What I want to point out here is really in the middle of the slide, you can see we have a platform with a single agent that feeds into it. So if you have VMDR with our cloud agents already installed on your assets, that same cloud agent also covers CSAM, our inventory solution, patch management, Total Cloud, our CNAPP solution, CAR, policy compliance, FIM, and EDR. That one agent can perform all of these solutions with nothing else needed to install ever. The last thing I'll mention about the agent is that the last two are a different color. That's to show you that these are the only two modules that have any kernel hooks. All the rest of our solutions use the cloud agent strictly in user space. Now, I'd like to drill down into three of our solutions that we like to call our core three. These solutions cover all aspects of the vulnerability lifecycle, from asset management, vulnerability detection, and patching. These solutions are CSAM, our cybersecurity asset management solution, VMDR, our vulnerability management detection and response solution, and TRU Risk Eliminate for patch management, mitigation, and isolation of vulnerabilities. So let's start with CSAM. Reducing cyber risk starts with knowing your assets. With CSAM, you can discover and monitor entire attack surfaces to accelerate incident triage and remediation workflows. You can enrich your inventory with business context, bringing business information and criticality from your third-party sources. Additionally, CSAM helps you to detect security gaps and quantify risks by identifying missing cyber risk asset context in CMDB and ServiceNow. And through Qualys TRU Risk, we bring risk-based prioritization for reporting as well as remediation. And finally, we can simplify orchestration and automation to accelerate incident triage and remediation workflows. Now let's take a quick look at vulnerability management with VMDR. Many of you are probably already familiar with vulnerability management tools, so let me just discuss how VMDR differentiates itself from our competitors. We help you visualize and measure cybersecurity risk and present it in meaningful ways to audiences from your CISOs to IT teams and help you proactively reduce risk and track reduction over time. We offer a true risk-based prioritization for vulnerabilities with Qualys TRU Risk, leading to an 85% reduction in the vulnerabilities to prioritize for remediation. We can close the IT security team gap through seamless integrations between ITSM tools like ServiceNow as well as patch management solutions. And our comprehensive threat intelligence from over 25 threat sources means you can leverage our insight instead of having to do that analysis yourself. And finally, we have TRU Risk Eliminate. But at this point, I'm going to go into my second poll question. Crystal, if you could help me out with that. So how is your patching program? Is it great? Is everything automated and everything is secure? Uh, do you patch OS vulnerabilities, but are you challenged by third-party software and applications? Do you have vulnerabilities that you can't patch? End of life, end of software, end of service software, configuration changes, operational requirements, etc. Or is the struggle real? And we'll wait a few seconds for that to get populated. Okay, so we've got some answers here. It looks like 48% of you answered that we can patch OS vulnerabilities, but are challenged by third-party software and applications. 23% of you said things are going great, and congratulations. I'm glad things are going great for you with your automation here. That's great to hear that you're reducing your risk by limiting your exposure. 16% mentioned that they have vulnerabilities that they can't patch, and 13% of you said the struggle is real. And believe me, I understand that completely. It can be quite a challenge. Now that we have our inventory through CSAM and our vulnerabilities through vulnerability management detection and response, it's time to remediate and reduce our cyber risk. And again, we do so with a risk-based approach to remediate what matters most with Qualys patch management. This risk-based approach consists of three important features. The first is the ability to leverage dashboards to effectively communicate risk. Our dashboards let you to customize them so that they can be experienced by any number of personas or stakeholders in a way that makes sense to them and brings the information up that they need to see first. We can accurately detect and communicate risk profiles in real time. A few minutes ago, I talked about that Qualys Cloud Agent. Well, that same Cloud Agent that allows you to patch with our patch management solution is also providing vulnerability updates to Qualys every 4 hours, so you're never caught off guard. What that means is every 4 hours, it's inventorying all the software on those assets and reporting that to Qualys. So as new signatures are released or new 0 days are discovered, and we're able to identify them, we're able to do so within 4 hours. So you're always up to date with the vulnerability information for your assets for patching with that same cloud agent with nothing else ever to install. And finally, Qualys TRU Risk prioritizes cyber risk by what matters most. We look at business impact, exploitability, and criticality. So what does an integrated patching solution look like by the numbers here? Here we can see the mean time to remediation for a variety of CISA known exploitable vulnerabilities, both with and without Qualys' integrated patching solution. As you can see, the average without Qualys integrated patching is almost 30 days versus 17 days with Qualys patching. That's a 43% reduction in exposure. In fact, while we are best known for vulnerability management, did you know that Qualys is the largest patch vendor in the world? Last year alone, we issued over 100 million patches to our customers through that single cloud agent installed on their assets. Patching is great, and you absolutely should be patching. But what if you can't patch? What if it's a 0 day or there's no patch or the patch doesn't exist yet, or you can't risk an operational impact through patching? What are you supposed to do to reduce your risk? Well, in those situations, this is where the real strength of Qualys' TRU Risk Eliminate comes in. We all know that there are some things you can patch, and then there are some things that you can't. Sometimes there are vulnerabilities for which a patch does not exist, or there's an operational risk to patching. In those use cases, we offer TRU Risk Mitigate that can address vulnerabilities through things like configuration changes, uninstallation of end-of-life or end-of-service software, blocking ports, stopping services, and more. So think about it as actually going onto that asset and making changes to that asset itself to mitigate that vulnerability until a patch is available. And when none of those are effective solutions, TrueRisk Isolate can isolate a device from a network while still allowing remote patching and control from Qualys or other allowed resources, all through the Qualys Cloud Agent again. And that is the value of our core three solutions to help you reduce your cyber risk with cybersecurity asset management for asset inventory, VMDR for vulnerability management, detection and response, and prioritization and remediation through patch management and TrueRisk Eliminate. Thank you for your time today as I discuss Qualys TrueRisk, a true risk-based approach to identify and remediate the critical vulnerabilities that contribute the most to your cyber risk. And thank you for your time as I discussed the Qualys platform, our various sensors, and the Qualys Cloud Agent, and finally, our core three solutions for asset inventory, vulnerability management, and prioritized remediation. So at this time, I would like to turn things over to Chris Carlson from Critical Start. Thank you again.
John, great. Thanks very much for that. It's always a pleasure to work with you and do these joint webinars on not only Qualys and your technology and platform for customers' needs, but also Critical Start and our managed security services on how to make those best-of-breed technologies even better in customer environments. So I'm Chris Carlson, the Chief Product Officer here at Critical Start. Fun fact, I actually used to work at Qualys. So I was at Qualys for 4 years as VP of Product Management for the Cloud Agent, the technology that John talked about that powers a lot of the Qualys capabilities. And when we were creating our vulnerability managed service, our managed security service for vuln management, there was only one vendor that I considered to partner with, and that's Qualys. So for this part of the session, I'll talk about how a managed vulnerability service or managed security service for Qualys can help you get better and outsized returns of your vulnerability management program. So I'll touch upon operational impact of a successful vulnerability management program deployment, having been at Qualys for 4 years and now at Critical Start, where we're managing vulnerability deployments for our customers. Some of the same themes come back on what's limited them to get the best of their vulnerability management program. I'll talk about prioritized patching to reduce risk as well, capabilities that Critical Start is layering on top of what you get from Qualys, and then go into a bit more detail on the operational capabilities that our managed services does, working with customers on the Qualys deployment. So about Critical Start first. So we were founded in 2012. We're a managed security services provider. We primarily focus on what we call MDR, or Managed Detection and Response. And we've been focused on this for quite a long time. Recently, in the past 2 years, we realized that customers, in addition to having a managed detection and response need in order to be reactive as security threats and issues happen, customers want to get more proactive and identify vulnerabilities and remediate those before an exploit occurs. So because of that, we launched our turnkey vulnerability management service with Qualys a couple of years ago, and it's been very successful, and it has driven greater outcomes for our customers in their overall security program. So I want to start with this, that we'll go into the first poll, is that there's 3 things that really impact a successful vulnerability management program, and it's primarily on operational challenges. Qualys is a fantastic tool, but it needs to be configured correctly. It needs to be deployed correctly. And also realizing that your network environment, your application environment, your endpoint environment is always changing. And without keeping up to date on those changes in your environment, you may create vulnerability coverage gaps or scanning windows that are missing. So here's something which we'll ask in a poll, but these 7 things in 2 categories really has found that impacted the success or the great success of most vulnerability management programs. The 4 on the right with the yellow triangle are around things that can impact a complete or accurate result of your vulnerability program. Complete may be you don't get all the results. You have 1,000 servers, but you're only getting results for 900 of them. Accurate results, you may getting results from all 1,000 servers, but they're not accurate. They have false positives. There's ghost software. Things aren't configured correctly. And then once you have a complete and accurate inventory of vulnerabilities, then the 3 on the left impact those operational challenges on how you get timely vulnerability remediation. So as John talked about, you can identify vulnerabilities very quickly, but if you don't remediate them, so either mitigate, eliminate, patch, before a threat actor or adversary can target those vulnerabilities and exploit your environment, that gap between detection and fix is where adversaries operate within their campaigns. So that leads us to our first poll. What do you find most challenging about managing vulnerabilities? This could be a multi-select, but I think we just gave a single choice here so you can focus on the most challenging item.
I still see answers pouring in, so I'll wait a few more seconds before sharing.
I think I gave the hardest question for people to rank stack and think about their most challenging about managing vulnerabilities. Some of the questions in the chat lined up with some of these things as well. So very closely tied between 1 and 2. So 34% overwhelmed by the volume of vulnerabilities. We see that all the time. And there's always vulnerabilities. There's always going to be more vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities you can't mitigate. But it really comes down to those prioritization, which is number 2 at 31%, on which ones to fix. I have some data from some of our first customers that we launched a couple of years ago, and that will be eye-opening in terms of which vulnerabilities that you want to target, especially around ransomware impacting vulnerabilities. So our vulnerability management service by Critical Start, we partner with Qualys. Yes, I did work there and have a lot of intimate details on the capabilities and quality of their platform, but the innovation that they have done since then in expanding across wider attack surface and wider vulnerability areas, and supporting technologies makes it a great product to get a outsized outcome from your security programs. However, the great product not well implemented, and that could be a variety of reasons why. Maybe you lack some of the detailed knowledge or some of the best practices, or there's some process situations that you're not aware of, or some configurations that can really optimize and accelerate how you get good outcomes. So our vulnerability managed service is a fully managed service of the Qualys deployment in your environment, and it covers these three areas. So you can buy the tool, the Qualys tool for vulnerability scanning. Where Critical Start comes in is the process and the 24/7 operation to make sure that's set up correctly at implementation, make sure it's configured correctly, operational monitoring on an ongoing basis. So for example, if you have one of their many scan engines, let's say their virtual scanner from Qualys, and that virtual scanner running in a virtualized environment gets turned off, maybe the IT team just powered down that virtual machine, what you're going to get in the next day or two is less vulnerabilities. But in reality, you don't have less vulnerabilities in your environment. You have Qualys systems not operating correctly because it was changed in your environment without your knowledge. So that constant 24/7 operational monitoring that Critical Start gives to make sure that you have a proper deployment that is well configured and well tuned. And then areas around break fix. So maybe there's things in your environment that have changed. Maybe you're adding subnets or decommissioning subnets or adding applications or decommissioning applications. Areas of hunting down unknown applications. Back in the day, it's less common now, but back in the day, when a business team or an application team wants to do a proof of concept on a vendor software, what do? They spun up a Windows server inside your network. They loaded applications on top of it. People were accessing it. And then when the POC was concluded, the license ended, but the application with vulnerable Apache web server and vulnerable Microsoft Server 2012, 2019 was still running inside the environment. Maybe you call it shadow IT. I actually call it ghost IT because it was there and running and people may not know about it. And then once you have your accurate and complete list of vulnerabilities, that's where the prioritization comes in. Not only the risk-based vulnerability management or prioritization with the capabilities that Qualys gives and unique for Critical Start, but how do you separate and communicate those remediations to the right teams? So for example, in that server case where you have a server operating systems that is running an application that is using off-the-shelf software that is also running software that your internal software development teams have built, it's not one team that would have to mitigate vulnerabilities. One team would do the operating system. One team may do the third-party software. One team, the development team, is not going to patch MySQL or Java that they implement. They would have to rebuild the application through a DevOps process or a DevSecOps process and mitigate the vulnerability through a new version build as part of that. So that's what Critical Start can help with, unique to every one of your environments. And a lot of things that people don't talk about once you prioritize patching is something that I call patch verification or patch compliance. So when you run a normal third-party patching system, the third-party patching system will tell you the patch has been executed, but you don't know if the vulnerability has been mitigated. So with Qualys, that integrated vulnerability detection and patch management does that full life cycle. But if you're using a third-party patching tool, not the Qualys tool, Critical Start and our managed service can still give you that verification that while the patch was deployed, the vulnerability wasn't mitigated, maybe because a registry key wasn't set, or maybe the system wasn't rebooted, which will then do a cleanup and mitigate the vulnerabilities. Critical Start has our own web interface that we use for our managed detection and response and our asset inventory. We've integrated the Qualys systems and platform of your data into our platform. You can see the asset visibility is our inventory list, and we can bring in Qualys VMDR data. We can bring all the asset criticality tags you set in Qualys and all criticality tags you set in our system that may not be available in Qualys. And you get all the visibility within our tool as well as the Qualys platform. And then we also give additional functionality in the Critical Start platform, which is highlighted by the red arrow on the right-hand side, which is host with vulnerability coverage gaps. So as Qualys goes out and scans and discovers assets and vulnerabilities inside its environment, there may be other systems that Qualys doesn't know about. Even if you configure the enterprise TRU Risk in a certain way, Critical Start as a managed detection and response vendor who are monitoring systems with other security controls, we can bring in other data and other telemetry and identify those assets that may not have had a vulnerability scan. That's part of the operational management that Critical Start gives on top of your Qualys deployment. And then in addition to the Qualys Enterprise TRU Risk that John talked about, we have additional capabilities that Critical Start brings in from some of our own Critical Start threat intel based on 2 million assets that we're monitoring that are being exploited and attacked every day by threat actors, and also bringing in commercial licensed threat feeds, bringing in Qualys asset tags, our own Critical Start inventory. And then if you're a customer of Critical Start Managed Detection and Response, the unique exploit detections on a vulnerability being exploited within your own environment. So there's one thing for SysAkev or someone else to say that this vulnerability is being exploited, but if we detect that the exploit is happening in your own environment, that is where you drop everything and you mitigate that vulnerability through an urgent patch cycle. You harden your defenses, you put in prevention capabilities, and you identify for any reactive capabilities of a threat actor successfully operating inside your environment. That's why for us at Critical Start, the reactive capabilities of managed detection and response, plus the proactive capabilities of our vulnerability management with Qualys becomes a powerful combination. And that prioritization we bring and also show within our platform. So you get everything out of Qualys, which I'll talk about in just a second. You get all of their dashboards, all of their reporting, all of the integrations, but we also bring that in and augment it with real threat activity data that's happening in your environment that we're monitoring and give you another extra view within your environment. So I mentioned where the right patches become very important, and John had a couple slides of that in terms of the volume of vulnerabilities you have, but in reality, it's only a handful. And some of those vulnerabilities are quite old that are impacting your security posture in your environment. So I took some data from Critical Start's customers. I took some random 10 customers and I created this 0% to 100% of ransomware exposure. What are the percent of assets in each of these 10 customers that have vulnerabilities that ransomware actors are targeting? Across these 10 customers, 32% on average, 32% assets in their environment, a third of their environment has vulnerabilities that ransomware actors are targeting. The distribution, though, is wide and varied. And this really is a difference, not in the Qualys tool, but in how you operate and manage that Qualys tool, how you do segmented reporting, how you recommend prioritization, how you create patching SLAs and measure it against patching SLAs, and understand that one team doesn't patch everything. Different teams within your environment may patch. So the exposure of customers 1, 2, and 3 that have a very low ransomware exposure risk to number 7, 8 higher than the average, and 9 and 10 that have a near 99% asset coverage in their environment with ransomware vulnerabilities targeted by threat actors. When you look in detail those vulnerabilities and the patches, there's really only 13 patches that handle all of them. And for most of them, there's only 2 or 3 that you can deploy to handle all of it. So if every one of these 10 customers, they push the Qualys patch management button from a job that we set up at Critical Start, you see a different picture. Almost all these vulnerabilities get quickly remediated, and your exposure to ransomware threats, ransomware malware goes down to very, very little. What's interesting is that one of these, and I'll try to find it right here in the list, near the bottom, the Microsoft Win Verify Trust Signature Validation vulnerability, that is not a patch. That is a registry key setting. And that registry key setting, while recommended by Microsoft, is not set by default. That's not even a patch. That is just a registry key change, and you can overcome most of the ransomware attacks that ransomware malware actors are targeting. So with that, let's take a little break and go to the next poll. What factor of all the operational things do you think that contributes, in your environment, most to a successful vulnerability management? So what factor, positive factor, that contributes most to the successful nature of a vulnerability management program? I'm going to guess on this, Crystal, before the results come up. All right, I've locked in my answer, but I won't say that. Let's see how the results come back.
All right, drum roll, please.
Okay, interesting. So yes, so I thought probably effective prioritization of vulnerabilities would be high, and that's correct. In fact, that ransomware vital signs example that I gave you shows just that. We have customers that onboard into our managed services program at Critical Start. We deploy Qualys, a first-time Qualys customer. We deploy it, and within a week or two, someone with maybe 4,000 assets gets 500,000 vulnerabilities in their system. There's no way that you can ever burn that down. So the question is, what are the most important vulnerabilities to patch by type of threat? Ransomware, since it's the most business disrupting attack, is an area that our customers focus on. So 31% effective prioritization of vulnerabilities, 16% frequent and comprehensive vulnerability scanning. That's actually a fantastic point. In fact, I went to number 3 first. You can scan often to find new vulnerabilities that come out. And the great thing about the Qualys platform is once they scan the vulnerabilities, the data in the Qualys platform stores the vulnerabilities. So any risks that change, new exposure of a vulnerability being used for active attacks does not require a rescan. It just changes the data in the Qualys platform. And Critical Start, we pull the data into our platform. It just changes the data. So when a new threat comes out on a Tuesday, let's say, that is targeting a vulnerability for a certain attack type, you don't need to rescan. We've already accumulated the vulnerability in the Qualys platform and the Critical Start platform. It just gets a new attribute that it's now actively being targeted. So number 25, the number 2 is actually 25%, strong cross-team collab and communication, 100% correct. And I have some things in our managed service that helps overcome some of those challenges, and that's how we use the Qualys tagging capability for that. So thanks for the results. I think I have one more poll coming up toward the end. So I'll take the next few minutes to go through the deep dive. A lot of our customers ask, and we have a service description that describes that. Do you just set up the scan and push the scan button and you're done? No. This takes very comprehensive and a lot of best practice and an application rigor, an operational rigor to deploy the Qualys application and vulnerability management. And I'll give you a deep dive into some of those capabilities and those service levels that we deliver for you. So number 1, appropriate asset scoping. We interview our customers that were onboarded and we say, what environments do you care about the most? Do you have PCI scoped environments that you want to put in? Are third-party environments part of your scope, and are you allowed and able to scan them? How are you for cloud? What are your remote users looking like? How are you deploying the cloud agent on all of your assets? What systems do you want to remove from your asset scoping from a scan? Printers are notoriously fickle to a vulnerability scan of any vendor. You scan a printer, you do it on the wrong day a week, the printer spits out 1,000 pages of garbage. I don't see a lot of your faces, but for those of you who lived through that, you know what that means. Maybe you want to take those printers or those IP phones or your mainframes out of your scan jobs. That's part of the work that we do for you. Then we use the Qualys capabilities, the asset discovery scans, all their discovery methods, all their map scans, and then we work with you to create the correct vulnerability scan program for your environment. You get all of the capabilities from what Qualys delivers from a scanning sensor or a sensor. I have 3 on here. John had maybe, 1 million, John, in your list of all the things that Qualys has. We can use all of those as part of the environment. And then in addition to the default scan configurations, it is the custom scan policies that we can put together. So for example, you may not want to do a full remote scan of all 65,000 ports on certain systems. Maybe you want to do a lightweight scan, or maybe you have scanning windows for a network scan. They can only scan on the weekends, but you want to deploy the agent to scan continuously and those type of things. And then what happens when the host is dead? When a host is decommissioned, when someone's laptop goes into a drawer, when it's a virtual machine and it goes away, you get dead hosts, and part of our service will continually monitor those dead hosts and purge the scan data. That goes to the point of accurate and complete. If you have 100 virtual machines that automatically get turned off, the vulnerability still exists in the Qualys platform unless through a configuration or through a process, you remove those vulnerabilities from your reporting because they don't exist anymore, because those assets don't exist anymore. All the operational IZ the scans is what we do at Critical Start. We work with you on the authentication settings or auth records for network scanning. We work with you on scheduled or on-demand scans, role-based access systems, permission models with the Qualys Cloud Agent. So for example, on Windows, it runs as a system, but on Linux, it may run with a different permission or privilege model, and we can work with you on that. And also the last one, continuous monitoring of a scan job. Once again, if a scan breaks or there's a firewall implemented that you all don't know about, and then the network scan doesn't break, or someone blocks the outbound connection of the Qualys Cloud Agent to the Qualys platform, you won't get results. And that's the monitoring that we focus on at Critical Start, so you have a complete and accurate inventory of vulnerabilities inside your environment. Qualys has a fantastic list of standard out-of-the-box reports. Many of our customers need a customized report for different purposes: audit reporting, patch verification reporting. And the one thing that we do a lot is what I highlighted in green is around tag creation and management. So Qualys has a lot of tags. You can create them statically, you can create them dynamically. A lot of those tags, how you manage, not only how you do scans, but how you manage, how you report on vulnerabilities. So in that example where I gave you that a server has 3 different teams that handle remediation of vulnerabilities: the system team that handles the operating system of the server, the application team that handles the out-of-the-box third-party applications, and the software development team for custom software that utilizes embedded software like Java. You can't just give them a vulnerability list. So the work that we do at Critical Start to interview you, we will tag those vulnerabilities on those assets separately. Then we can give Qualys reporting separation to you, so you know that these vulnerabilities should be remediated by the software development team through a DevSecOps process. These other vulnerabilities are remediated by this other team through a different process. And that's part of the customization that we give to you at Critical Start. John spent a lot of time talking about the enterprise TRU Risk. That is an area of prioritization. So once again, you'll never, ever get rid of all your vulnerabilities unless you get rid of all your assets. But if that happens, then no one's in business. But we work with you on helping you prioritize or setting up SLAs on top of that as well. The remediation and patch verification, if you use any system to remediate patches, Qualys will give you that report as well and the evidence, and then we will also help you with a prioritized list of vulnerabilities, send the patch reports to stakeholders, and those type of things. If you have and you utilize the Qualys TRU Risk Eliminate, the patch management module, and the other 2 modules, that is something that we will also configure in your environment, but it's a different configuration. The tags that you use in Qualys for a successful patching program are almost always different than a successful vulnerability management program. So for example, you may have tags that you want to include in your vulnerability scan process, but you want to exclude from a patch deployment. So going back to that example again, where you may want to find the Java vulnerability for the software development teams, but you want to exclude that Java from being patched in your Qualys patching programs. So while there could be dozens or hundreds of thousands of tags on the vulnerability side, there's dozens or hundreds of tags on the patch management side to make sure that you have accurate patching that does not impact the operational your operational environment. So for example, what are the test groups to deploy patches? What are your early adopters? What are your rollout groups? What's the 10% rollout group? What's the 50% rollout group? What's the 90% rollout group? How do you do tagging for application families? Patch Chrome, patch Firefox, patch WinZip. How do you handle patching or tagging for urgent critical patching? I worked at Qualys when WannaCry came out, and a lot of organizations were not ready to patch WannaCry when it came out. Now I think more people are, and that's a standard capability that we implement for you as part of the Critical Start offering. What does your break glass urgent patching process look like? Those tags are way different than your normal 30-day patch cycle or your 15-day patch cycle and those type of things. And then if you have risk or security frameworks like PCI DSS, Qualys has a lot of out-of-the-box capabilities for that. What we do for Critical Start from a service delivery is make sure that they're run So if you miss your quarterly scan or you miss your yearly scan for your auditor or for your cyber insurance, that could be some tough explaining to do. We put that as a priority one service that needs to be scanned as part of your normal operational to make sure that it does scan and you do get those reports and you meet your auditor's requirements, you meet your SOC 2 Type 2 requirements, you meet your cyber insurance requirements to give you those quarterly or annual vulnerability scans through Qualys. And then, of course, we engage with you as a managed service for monthly or quarterly review meetings, customer-centric single dashboard and presentation to review all the things and recommendations, and then suggestion of appropriate SLAs for remediation. Qualys finds a vulnerability very quickly. They and us give you a prioritization, but if it's days or weeks or months before it's remediated, that's a risk exposure that threat actors are counting on. So we can help work with you on SLAs and help you track patch progression and patch progress against the internal SLAs that you set. So last one, this is both for Critical Start and for Qualys. Would you like to learn more about the Critical Start Vulnerability Management Service and the Qualys VMDR? Single choice, I will expect a high percentage in one of these answers. So thank you for filling this out. And then we have about 12 minutes or so till we can go into a Q&A. So Crystal, while the poll comes in, if you want to go ahead and share and bring up your slides.
Yep, we will gate the results of this poll to make time for Q&A. So thank you everybody for submitting your response. I'll give it just another second here. Just saw a response comment. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you again. All right, so now it's Q&A time. We got a lot of questions. Hopefully we have enough time to get through, but if we don't, know that we will follow up with you after the event to continue the conversation. So let's go back up top. Some of these questions surfaced during John, your presentation, so feel free to tick those. So first, Doug asked, does Qualys have vulnerability priority rating?
Yeah, Doug, I think you asked this before I got to it, but Qualys TRU Risk is a risk-based priority based method we've created to address vulnerabilities that would, in a way that would significantly reduce cyber risk in the most efficient way possible. And Crystal, I can go through and read these questions too and look for the questions unless you want to do it, but I'm happy to. So
Awesome, take it away.
Sure. Mark asked about Palo Alto's easy to integrate IoT with Qualys. So we can scan Palo Alto firewalls for vulnerabilities, if that's what you're referring to. Additionally, you can leverage the Qualys API to, move vulnerabilities into Palo Alto or pull Palo Alto information up into Qualys with like ETM or something. So it really kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish here, but between vulnerability scanning and our API, I would say the answer is unequivocally yes. Let's see. Which IoT devices are being targeted most commonly? Which ones do you think will be targeted more in the future? I'll give my response from a Qualys perspective. Chris, if you have any thoughts on this, I'd be happy to hear it too. I think the most challenging is, BYOD or people using their own personal devices, mainly because if you don't keep up with patching them, those become vulnerabilities that can later be exploited. We have management of devices for a reason, right? So that, things are kept up to date. But, if you've got a work computer and your kids are playing games on it at night because it's better than your home computer, that could be a security risk. So I think that is probably, from my perspective, one of the biggest risks for remote work. And I think that will probably remain so in the future. For an IoT type device. Additionally, there's going to be things like, firewalls and everything else that people are using, which are always going to be targeted because they are often shipped out with default credentials, and people are not necessarily changing them. I wish I could say it was going to be something cool, like, your TV or refrigerator was going to become an access point for attack. But the reality is, I still think that's going to be a very limited exposure. Chris, did you have any thoughts on this? I started answering for a different question, I think. So it's about IoT and which ones are going to be most commonly targeted.
Yeah, I think it comes down to a couple things. One is think about IoT within the environment and think about IoT that is internet facing. right? So for example, if you have a smart TV that runs Linux and has never been patched, if it runs in a conference room within your network behind 10 firewalls, you're probably okay. But if your IoT devices are on the internet and they're open to the internet, then it becomes a much different story. Then it becomes someone can target them and bring them into a massive denial of service attack against someone else. So in many cases, and Critical Start offers a managed detection and response for OT or operational technology. And for those systems that is hard to patch, that's where that segmentation between IT and OT and internet and OT become very powerful. Even it's the same thing for IoT that are on your IT network. So understand where they are, understand if they're reachable by the internet. That itself is a big risk reduction, even without patching them, because you may not be able to patch a smart TV or a badge reader or a camera or those type of things.
All right. Elaine asked what user permissions are needed for EC2 scans. If you're talking from the Qualys perspective, it's just a manager or sub-user with the ability to manage our virtual scanner appliances so that you can, deploy the scanner appliance, configure it properly, and launch EC2 scans against it. If you're talking about something else, maybe specific to AWS, if you follow up with an email, I could get you the information you're looking for. Brian asked, how long are scan results saved? By default, they are saved for 1 year. You can configure this so that they expire after, 1 month or whatever your time frame is. And PCI scans are saved by default for 3 years. So you do have some ability to change the scan retention dates for some of our things, but PCI is set to default to 3 years. What are the main security risks associated with remote work, and how does Qualys help mitigate them? Yeah, Zahid, I started answering your question about, bringing your own devices and everything. To me, that's the challenge with remote work is how are you managing those devices that those end users are working on at home? Are they using the company provided laptop, or are they using their own laptop because maybe it's faster? And the challenges with that and how we can help mitigate that. Obviously, it's going to be things like keeping, if you've got a Qualys agent installed on your company issued laptops, that will go a long way to keeping them up to date so that there's no browser vulnerabilities or OS vulnerabilities. Additionally, we can do things like, file integrity monitoring to see if files are being touched that shouldn't be touched, or being exported that shouldn't be exported. Things like EDR, so we can detect malicious activity on those laptops, through the cloud agent as well. So I think those are some of the important things. Having that agent on there for patching, for FIM, for EDR, those go a long way to reducing those security risks for those remote work persons. And again, I know we all hate doing our cybersecurity awareness training, but it has its place, and it's important too, just as a annual refresher to remind us of best practices to keeping our environment at home secure too.
John, let me pop over
Yeah.
and get the critical start questions, and then we can see where we end up for time. So I'll start with one. How does critical start stand out among other MDR providers? Well, I think we're great, of course, because I am working here. I think we stand out a couple different reasons. One is we're the only provider that has contractual SLAs on MTTR or median time to respond. And we respond on all alert severities within that. In fact, we have some data from last year. We received over 1.2 billion security events from all of our customers, and our MTTR on all customers was less than 38 minutes contractually. And then criticals can even get down into sub 5 minutes. We also have direct integrations that have probably the largest breadth and depth in terms of response actions. And we have what we call customized rules of engagement that we can interact with you depending on how you want to respond, us or you, across different types of users, different type of assets, and those type of things. There's a question on, is Critical Start available as standalone offering if we just want to access the Critical Start tools and dashboard, or only as a managed service? So interesting question. Our vulnerability managed, there's someone's email coming up. Our vulnerability managed service is a fully managed services using Qualys. So we help deploy Qualys, we manage Qualys, we use the Qualys tools, and then we bring all of the Qualys data into the Critical Start platform and overlay our unique capabilities and data on top of that. I showed you some screenshots from that. We have an offering that we call vulnerability prioritization, which is not managed. So you can bring Qualys, you can do it yourself, you can use our vulnerability prioritization that then brings in all of the Qualys stuff, all of our stuff, all the criticality, all of our MDR together, and that's not a managed service as part of that. There's another question on, does Critical Start provide security control recommendations out of the box? 100%. So when we onboard customers as part of our managed detection and response, we have best practices for every technology tool that they onboard into our platform, all of the endpoint protection platforms that we support, all the network, all the identity, all of the email, those type of things. What we also do is we bring in all the threat detections, map them to MITRE ATT&CK matrix. Everyone maps to MITRE ATT&CK matrix. We also take the MITRE ATT&CK matrix and we map it to MITRE ATT&CK mitigation recommendations. So we take all the last 3 months of every true positive attack in their environment, map it over to MITRE ATT&CK mitigations, and those are some things you can implement that will actually prevent the attack from happening in the first place. So we did analysis of MITRE ATT&CK mitigations. Over 40% of mitigations are just configuration capabilities. And that, I would argue, is a security control that you can recommend. We also have the CIS and SANS top 20 out-of-the-box recommendations and survey within our platform. And you can also do a self-assessment on NIST 853, NIST 800, 171, NIST Cybersecurity Framework as control recommendations within our platform as well. Question on, a friend of mine moved away from a competing company due to the fact that notifications came super late. Was Critical Start due to ensure those notifications are sent out in a timely manner? Yes. So part of that is our SLAs, contractual SLAs on MTTR, 60 minutes or less. On average, we're 37 minutes. And for criticals and highs, we send notifications in less than 5 minutes. And that's for all threat alerts on all priority levels. Some providers may respond back to a critical. I'll give you a secret hint. Microsoft security tools do not have a critical rating. So if your MDR provider that you're investigating says, we'll respond to Microsoft criticals, that's a fake, because there's no Microsoft criticals ratings. We'll respond to vendor criticals, highs, down as part of that. And then last one, I'll just leave it to John. Agentless configuration. I'm assuming this is for one of the many Qualys sensors that you all have, if you want to handle the agentless question on the Qualys side.
So Jeff, I'm not really sure what you're asking. So we can perform vulnerability scans with agents, without agents, through APIs, through snapshot scans, with our CNAPP solution. There's lots of ways to get information from these assets. Obviously, we promote the cloud agent because it's going to give us the greatest fidelity of information about the assets that it sits on. So if I'm not answering that specifically, please follow up with an email to us. I'll be happy to expound upon whatever it is you're trying to get to. And I think I only had one other question, Chris, if I can answer it. Or
yeah, probably just time for one more, then we'll have Crystal finish this out.
Sure. Does Qualys support open source and third-party application patches? Yes, PM supports third-party software, third-party operating, we support OS patches for Mac, Linux, and Windows, third-party applications for the same, as well as some open source applications for those operating systems. So, the answer is yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Alrighty, thank you everyone for your questions. I really hope that you all walked away with valuable insights, and your participation is always appreciated. We'd love to see those questions. We'd love to get those poll results. So with that, I will conclude today's webinar. Once again, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to our speaker, Chris and John, for preparing the presentation, for giving us the insights. And I'd like to extend my thanks to all of you for attending our webinar, and I hope to see you at one of our future events. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.